Hello, my name is Jana Mende, and I'm working on a project with the working title Monolingualism Deconstructed, Modeling Hidden and Invisible Multilingualism in German Literature in the 19th Century. I am a traditional comparative literature scholar, which means that during my studies, I had very little contact with digital methods. When I did my PhD, I switched from comparative literature to linguistics. And this is where I first came in contact with methods that use digital tools to investigate larger corpora. And this is how I became interested in working with digital tools. So I'm a bit self-taught when it comes to digital humanities. I'm always very curious to use new tools, but I lack any formal training in this. Apply for this fellowship. I think it's a wonderful way to get to know more also about the deeper theoretical questions that are connected with it. Another thing that I find very helpful is that by now there are a lot of resources that help me to also quickly look into tools and see what I can do with it. Because most tools have usually some type of guide, documentation, tutorials that one can use and very, very quickly figure out, is this something that I would be able or willing or somehow comfortable to use. One thing that I learned here is that it's really important to look into the structure that the files you're working have, so that you really look into it and see what is actually a structure, what can you get out of your data, and what are questions that are basically impossible to answer from the data you have. Because as a literary scholar, I'm rarely confronted with questions that I cannot somehow answer with traditional methods. I will always find something in a text. But sometimes working with this quantitative data, it's completely different. I might ask for something that's actually not there. And this I found very insightful. And this is also something that I would sort of pass along. It's like, learn to read your data and then try a lot of tools and see what you can do with it. So reading metadata is, I think, a big sort of maybe blind spot for traditional scholars, or something that we don't immediately think about, or also maybe don't necessarily want to spend so much time on, but it's actually extremely important and crucial for this larger questions. I have to say, I actually saw it on Twitter. So when Twitter was still Twitter, I saw it on Twitter. I looked at it and it sounded really, really nice. And I read several of the project descriptions of I think it was the first round. And I thought, well, why not try this? Because it would actually be perfect for my project to get some help and support. And yeah, this is how I heard about it. And this is how I also learned more about it, by reading about the different projects that already existed. My project looks at ways how to find multilingual authors in texts that are mainly monolingually German, which means I have a great collection of biographical and bibliographical data from historical bibliographical dictionaries. And these are dictionaries of German writers in the 19th century. Most of the writers were chosen because they write in German. And my question is, if they not only wrote or thought or worked in German, but also in other languages, how can I figure out from those texts and those dates that are in there who that was, and whether these people are actually somehow interesting for sort of multilingual literary history? This has the background in multilingual literary studies that there's very little research on multilingualism in the 19th century because it is assumed that at that time national literature and national language is so strong that there's just very few to say about this. And there might be some sort of specific authors like Heinrich Heine, who is viewed as an exception because he wrote in French and in German. And I basically check whether this is true or whether we can, with quantitative methods, find more of these multilingual authors, and then also can say more about the way they used their multilingual competences in order to create literature for monolingual markets, but also for multilingual contexts. And this is basically also a question of metadata, because what I have is historical dictionaries with the bibliographical and biographical information about authors, really a lot of authors, like more than 10,000 authors who lived in the 19th century. And I try to figure out what that kind of data tells me about the multilingualism. Sometimes it's explicit. Sometimes it's mentioned that this person spoke French or taught in Russian or published in Polish newspapers. But sometimes it's also very implicit because I have the places of residence and then I can say, okay, this person lived in a multilingual area for most of their lives. So probably this person was in contact with Czech or with Yiddish or with other languages. Or this person changed from different linguistic areas. They migrated to Paris and then they migrated to Rome and then back to Germany. Probably they somehow were in contact with French and Italian. And this is usually reflected in the bibliographical data if we dig a little bit deeper. And all of that basically helps me to tell a story about how multilingual literature functioned in the 19th century. At the moment, it's basically a lot of tables. So it's Excel files with a lot of this information sort of in a structured way, because my sort of starting point was really digitized text, where I'm very lucky because the texts were already digitized. So that's great. But still they were unstructured. So the articles in these historical biographical lexica are not sort of very structured. You have a name, sometimes you have dates, sometimes you have places, sometimes you don't have anything except for a book title. And the first task was to structure this data. And I'm still in the process, but I got a lot of help and support here how to structure this data. I work a lot with OpenRefine in order to make this data better and better, and also enrich it and link it with other open data resources to actually create a real data set out of this collection of names. So that is basically the first step, this structuring, enriching the data that exists. And for that, it was immensely helpful to be here and to be able to talk to people who do this basically all the time, and who are experts on how to structure also this vast amount of messy data. My stay in Vienna helped me very much is how to structure it and how to really create then not only lists of names, a table of names, but really sort of beginnings to think in this relational databases structure. So that was incredibly helpful. So basically it was structuring the data and also then starting to model the data. So that is not only lists, but really these connections between authors, languages, texts, places as different entities, and how to create these relations is something that I, as a literary scholar, think about in my brain, and that works very well. But the moment I try to put it in an Excel table, it gets very, very complicated. And so that was a very, very instructive process to be here and to really work with people who took the time. So the coordinators, Vera, Mate, Lucas, others, took the time to really sit down with me and tell me how that works, that from my list of names, I actually create something that resembles in some way this idea that I have in my head in how these things are connected. I think the most, or one of the aspects that are underestimated in digital humanities research is how important it is to actually get together with the people, because sometimes people may think that it's also possible to do this online, which it surely is. However, being in this sort of hub, in this very specific setting here in Vienna, where everybody is working with these digital tools, is something where I learned something just by going to the coffee machine and then having a chat with somebody who's just working on a data model that's somehow similar and who teaches me something and how to structure my data. So this is an atmosphere, a way of working that one doesn't encounter in sort of everyday university life. And this sort of also informal exchange taught me a lot, which I can now use for the project. So just to say this, that is, it's not only sort of the formal exchange, or it's not only now we teach Jana what to do with her data, but it's also this sort of small exchange, waiting for your coffee, and then talking about your problem, and then just getting an input that actually leads to a very fast solution, which means I don't spend a day figuring out to do it by myself. The next step, so we are still at the sort of metadata level. The next steps are the texts. So the final project should also include a corpus of multilingual literature in the 19th century, which means the next step will be to get from the names that now I identified as multilingual authors in that time to what they actually did with their multilingualism and the text. Probably for my project, it will be case studies, but hopefully it will somehow inspire others to also work with those resources, and then also work with other texts that actually now basically are for the first time sort of put into this context of multilingual literature. So these are, of course, sometimes known authors, sometimes they're extremely unknown authors, but they now sort of are available, or will be available the moment I publish this data set, to be examined in the context of the history of multilingual literature.